thing for everyone. We're blessed to have a lot of veterans here today. But before we begin, we would like to have the Wise County Junior ROTC post the colors. So with everyone stand, please, and then we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We're here for two purposes today, not only to hear Colonel Frazier speak, but also to honor all of our veterans today. It's very emotional for me. Veterans are very special. Would you gentlemen please stand and be recognized? All veterans, please. Thank you. We will also have a reception afterwards out in the lobby for all of our veterans, so would y'all please hang around and stay with us and be our guests. I'm going to let someone introduce the Colonel who's knows him much better than me, but first I just want to say that you're aware of what he's done somewhat with his book that he's written, and he'll be around to sign these and to sell them to you afterwards, and I highly recommend them to you. Most of you have seen Ken Burns' The War, and you know a lot about his story. I got to have dinner with him last night. He's an amazing man, to say the least. He was on the Bataan Death March, a survivor of that. 4 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star, highly decorated veteran who's been through a lot. And we can never thank you enough, sir, for what you've done. And we want to give you as much time as possible, so I'll let your wonderful wife here, Terry, introduce you. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for your interest. Thank you for coming and hearing my husband's story. He's told me these stories throughout the years. Unbelievable. And I'm privileged to be his wife and have his name. He's become my hero, and he is my best friend. What a lovely place that you live. It's so picturesque. We live in South Alabama, below I-10, near the Gulf of Mexico, quite different than it is here. This is a beautiful part of the country, a land of the free, and the home of the brave. And what courage I have of a man that I call my husband. As I said, he's my best friend. And I want to introduce him to you. My husband, Colonel Glen Frazier, who will be your best friend.
Thank you very much. I am tickled to death to speak to you this morning. And I want to tell you a little something about that statement. I had a friend of mine from Atlanta, went to Japan, and was going to speak at a breakfast for businessmen. and he gets he was speaking through an interpreter. I don't know whether any of you have had much experience through an interpreter, but sometimes it just doesn't come out right. And he said, "Good morning." And the interpreter said, "Ohio-san." He said, "I'm tickled to death to speak to you this morning." And the interpreter said he scratches himself until he dies just to talk to you. So sometimes they don't come out like you want it to. But anyway, thank you, sir. And I appreciate the university and all of you for having me here. I have a little hoarse once in a while, but I'll make it. And it's a wonderful time to come up here, and a wonderful time of the year. We see a change from our part of the country, and I thank all of you. And I thank all of you for having interest. How many of you saw the Ken Burns' documentary? Could you hold your hands? Well, it looks like you did real well, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with him on this documentary. They interviewed 500 people and only accepted 45, so I feel like it's sort of special to be able to get in that. And it's done a wonderful thing for me. My wife and I and my son have traveled and signing books, and it looks like everybody wants to get involved, and I appreciate that. It was true that I was just 16 years old, sort of upset about a few things. I think some of these things are brought out in the documentary, but I want to tell you about them too. And I was tried to get into the Navy at 16. My family wouldn't let me, and my friends were all going to the Army. It was the patriotism in Alabama was real strong at that time, and Germany was heating up, and Hitler was getting all kinds of countries and taking them. And I really wanted to go into service myself. But I had a little problem with my girlfriend. We've been friends for all these years and didn't realize we really cared anything about each other much until just right at the last. And this was July the 3rd, 1941. So she informed me that she was going to meet her new boyfriend's family. Well, in Alabama in the South, it may be that way here. That was an indication that she was going to get married. And man, I told her, I said, "Look, if you go, I'm not going to be here when you get back." So I kept her out till about 3 o'clock in the morning, and her mother was standing at the house. When we drove up, I thought she had a gun, but she had a broom. But she told me in no certain terms that she's going to break her appointment. So anyway, so I got on my Harley and went back home. Couldn't go to sleep. Got up the next morning, and I was real upset, so I was just riding, trying to forget about what was happening. And I wound up in Montgomery, Alabama at Honky Tonk some of us were going to. In those days, you could go in one at 16. Couldn't drink, but you could go in there and have a Coke or something. So I was there muttering, trying to find out what I was going to do. And the owner came up and he said, "I told you guys not from Lowndes County not to come in here by yourself. So those guys over there figuring to whip you." And of course, we'd whipped every one of them up there at one time or another. You know, so they didn't like us very well coming up there and dating their girlfriends. But anyway, so I said, "Well, I'll leave just as quick as I get through this Coke." He looked at me sort of hateful and said, he grabbed the Coke out off my table and he said, "You're leaving right now." So as I walked out after losing that nickel Coke, you know, in those days it was a nickel. That was hard to lose that nickel Coke. So I got on my motorcycle and I started, and a rage of hate or anger came over me. So I turned the motorcycle around and hit the right door, knocked it clear up next to the bar, went through the tables and chairs and got back on his high-polished dance floor. I made a figure 8 back there, those old tires on those old motorcycles in those days, black tires. And then I sent it in the middle, and here I went out of spinning out of there, right through the middle, right through some more chairs. And when I went out, I looked over my shoulder and saw him coming out of the back with a shotgun. And I took his right door and knocked it way out in the parking lot. So I knew if I went to the road, I'd get in trouble. So I went around the bushes and around the building and went up on the road. I went down to a service station there close, and he said, I told him what I did, and he said, "Man," he said, "that guy will shoot you down like a dog. You better get out of town." So I went by the Army recruiter's office. I said, "This is the day." So I pulled in there, and they said, "So sergeant said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to enlist." And he said, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 21. He said, "Let me see your draft card, because if you was 21 July the 1st, 1941, you had to register for the draft." I said, "I wasn't 21 that day." He said, "Well, when's your birthday?" I said, "Today." And so they didn't ask for anything else. An hour and a half later, I was in the Army, and I volunteered for the Philippines. So what I got from that on out was rough, but I asked for it. And I told a lie that was the biggest lie I've ever told in my life, and I don't encourage anybody to even tell the small one, because the big ones and the small ones get you in trouble. I thought that was a small lie. Well, I didn't start out too well. I met my first drill sergeant down in Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and he could blow a whistle louder than anybody, and he could talk and blow the whistle and yell at the same time. And when he blew that whistle, the spit would fly about 6 foot in front of him. And I really got indoctrinated. We got us some clothes that didn't fit. They just threw them at us. And so we put them on, and the captain came along, and we had a little pre-drill before inspection by the general. And he says to the sergeant, he said, "Where did you get these guys?" And he said, "Where did you get these clothes?" He said, "GI issue, sir." He said, "Well, I tell you what I want you to do. I want you to hide them. I don't even want the general to see them tomorrow." Said it's the motliest looking crew I've ever seen in my life. So that was the start of my encounter. I was shipped to the Philippines, got in there early. I didn't ever go to boot camp. I went to a school for the 75th Ordnance. I was transferred into MacArthur's Army, the Philippine Army, and I was detached to the Philippine Army, and 75th Ordnance. And the day that the war started and they bombed Pearl Harbor, they told us that we were at war, and they told us about it, and we was all alerted. And the planes came in, and nobody ever says anything about. I don't take anything away from Pearl Harbor, believe me. I don't even want to, but we lost more people. We lost about 6,000 people that day. They bombed Nichols Field, Clark Field, Cavite, Corregidor, and some places in Manila. And we realized that we was at war. And on about the 15th of that month, which is December, 15th, 16th, the Japanese were preparing to land at Lingayen Bay. They did, and they came aboard and they went 10 miles the first day. So MacArthur said he was waiting on finding out what their intentions are. Well, shoot, I'm just a young boy and been in the Army just a short while, and I could figure out what he was going to do, what they were doing, because that was the 14th Army. They was overrunning us. So we went back into Bataan, and when we got back into Bataan, we tightened it up, and that's when we really gave the Japanese what they asked for. We killed about 100,000 of them total and all on the Philippine campaign. And when it come to time that we didn't have any food hardly at all, we were automatically at a half ration. Then we went to about a third ration a day, a can of salmon for 35 or 40 men, and some rice. We ate everything we could eat. We ate the caribous, we ate the horses, we ate the mules, we ate the lizards, we ate a lot of other things we ate, but I can't tell. And when you get hungry, you'll eat anything. So when General MacArthur left for Australia, I said, and all of us did, thank God he's gone. And that's when we really got out into fighting, because we knew that we wasn't going to get any help, because reinforcements never came. General King took it on his own to surrender Bataan, and against MacArthur's orders. MacArthur wanted us to fight to the last man. He could issue that order because he wasn't there, the way I look at it. But anyway, so we were told to go to a designated place, which was Marvelous Runway, and surrender. We went there and turned ourselves in. I want to back up just a minute and tell you one important thing. While the bombing was going on and all that, the first raid, our mess sergeant was sitting at a table outside, and here comes a little gray monkey about that high, screaming, jumped up on the table and looked him right in the eye and was screaming and screaming at him. So we called him radar because he could hear the planes before we could hear them. And after that you'd start going in a foxhole, you couldn't beat him in there. He'd see you headed to a foxhole, he'd beat you there. He also learned is that, you have a foxhole that way, planes was coming from that way, he got on that side. Coming from that way, he got on that side. He was really trained. And then he learned the difference between the zeros and a few P-40s. We only had 3 or 4 of them at the time of flying. And so we called him radar, and when we had to leave, it was a sad day for us because we had to bury our flag and then report to the designated place, which is Marvelis. So the death march started late in the afternoon for me. They had searched us, and anybody found anything, if they found anything of Japanese on them, they shot. A good many of them were shot right there on the spot. But I started marching late at the afternoon, just about dark, and I marched 6 days and 7 nights. And the horrors of the death march really hasn't been told. In fact, if it was in my book, I didn't put all the horrors in there because I wanted people to read it, but I did illustrate a good bit. But I marched those 6 days and 7 nights, never stopped, did not have any water except a little water that rained and got on my hands. And when I got to the final end of it, I couldn't even pick up my feet. I just dragged them. And my tongue was swollen. It wouldn't even go back to my mouth hardly. I saw guys executed. I saw them execution style with a saber, bayoneted. I saw them burying them alive. I saw them just leaving them there. I saw trucks, the Japanese trucks run over them in the road, run over them just like a frog in the road or a dog, didn't care. They would put the bayonets fixed in the stakes of the truck, and when they come along at night, they just cut the guys until somebody yelled that it was happening. It was brutal. And my friend and I had planned to try to escape. We figured we knew the area because we'd been out there long before the war started, and we knew what we could do and what we couldn't do. So we figured we'd go to the 4th day and then try to escape because we could run. When we got to the 4th day, we couldn't run. So we had to stick with it and go on. I went to Camp O'Donnell, where I saw them leave guys on details and everywhere, just wouldn't bury them, and had no respect for the dead. In fact, they classified us as yellow dogs anyway, because we gave up. And I was on the burial detail one day, and I had 2 sets of dog tags. So I threw one set in the grave. My idea was, if I was one of those out there that was shot or left by the side of the road, at least my family would have some kind of closure. And I never dreamed that they would ever send us to Japan. But I went out on one detail that we called Talbot's Road Detail, where 306 men went out, and 3.5 months on it, 25 hours alive. When they took us back to Bilibid Prison, which they were using for a staging area to send prisoners to Japan for slave labor, they wouldn't even, the corpsmen wouldn't even touch us because we were so dirty. So they put us in the middle of the street and washed us down. By that time, I'd had a real case of hate for the Japanese. And I'd like for you all to think, if you was in my place, and I'm going to tell you from now a few things that made me hate them much more. And a lot of people, I understand, hate them still. And I had, I guess, as bad a hate job as I could get. But I'll compare it to a killing in the Old West, where you had a gun, every time you kill somebody, you put a notch on your gun. Well, I put hate notches on my memory, is about the way I put it. And I hated those rascals for everything they did to us. I hated them for the march. I hated them for the landing. I hated them for the war. I even hated them when they took our 10 centavos when we was in Manila playing music on the jukebox before the war. They come in, the Navy boys, and flip up our selection and put their yarn on there, you know. And I hated them then. And we tore up a bar down there because we hated them. Anyway, I had a bad case of hate. And as one thing I had to do, I had to get used to killing somebody. I'm not bragging about it, but on the other hand, it was a matter of survival. And I could not just think in my own mind how I was going to do that. Well, as my friend and I was walking to the hospital to see a friend that had been in a truck wreck, here comes 2 Zeros. And they strafed us and bombed the hospital, and they knew it was a hospital because it was marked very well at all 4 corners with a great big cross. And when they started to leave, they'd always hold back 1 bomb to drop somewhere just at random. So I went in the right ditch, and he went in the left ditch. And he dropped a bomb, and I got up and looked and couldn't see my friend. I only found his left foot and his left shoe. And then when that pilot turned that plane up right there, if I could have, I would have reached up there with my bare hands and pulled him down. After that, I didn't have any problems. I didn't have any problems shooting them. I didn't even hunt them to shoot them. My job was getting ammunition to and from the front lines in the Battle of Bataan, and I would I'd wire the ammunition dump to blow it up. I'd lay in the bushes and wait for them to come and get all over what they found, and I'd blow them all to kingdom come. I mean, I became that type of person very quickly. When people ask me once in a while, well, how in the world did you do it? I said, well, it got tough. I just had to get tougher. That's all there was to it. And so after we were washed down at the Bilibid prison, they put us on a ship and shipped us to Japan. Now, I'm sort of going to try to tell you sort of the things that happened there because it was very interesting. I went on a small ship and it wasn't one of the hell ships, but it was similar to it because there were only 50 of us on board. When we got to Moji in 1942, the winter of 1942, they told us that the emperor said we was his guest. That's why I named my book Hell's Guest, because I was in 4 slave labor camps, and I was beat many, many times. I was marched and without actually mercy again. I was bayoneted. I was up for execution. And when I looked at that Jap, he had me up. Some of this was covered in the documentary. But when he had me out front and he had his saber to my neck, sort of nicked me a little bit, I looked him straight in the eye. I never took my eyes off of him because there was a guard behind me, the interpreter there. And he said, the interpreter said, he's going to execute you and set an example for everybody has to obey orders. And I said, well, we didn't even know that was an order of keeping your hands in your pocket while you're walking down the street in cold. He said, that applies to all regulation, Army regulation. You know better than that. So anyway, he's going to execute me. And I'm looking at him and kept my eyes on him. I wasn't going to stand there and let him chop me up. I was going to make some kind of attempt if he did. So the good Lord gave me the words that I said to him because I didn't even know anything about that spiritual aspect. I looked at him and I said, he can kill me, but he cannot kill my spirit. And my spirit's going to lodge in this body until the day he dies. And the interpreter told him, and he said, say that again. So I told him, said the same thing, and I added, I said, there's plenty of Americans coming, and when they get here, any Japanese that's killed an American for an unjust cause, that spirit's going to be lodged in their body until the day he dies. He frowned and backed up. I'd never seen one back up when he got that far with it. And I say that's when my sales career started, too. I tell you right now, that was one of the best jobs I ever did. But on the other hand, when that come over me that he was going to cut my head off, it was a great reality to me. And I also thought about how wonderful it'd be to get out of this. Because I'd been slave labor, I worked hard, I was underfed, and undernourished. I had double pneumonia twice, didn't have anything but an aspirin, and so makeshift hospital, which was a forest. I was bayoneted for not goose stepping. I was beat many times for the things they caught us with stealing. We became rogues. And one of the things that has never been published or talked about is what the Americans did while they were in Japan. Well, we had what we call a sabotage group, and most all of them participated in it. And I want to tell you some of the funny things that happened, and some of the things that wasn't just like the Japanese wanted it. Anyway, they had us that they were going to. We was fainting once a day. Somebody was going to faint on each detail. When they fainted right before we came in, we'd have to carry them on a litter and carry the guy back to the barracks and everything. So most of us were skin and bones, 125 pounds or something like that. Well, we had a guy there that was 200 pounds. It looked like he'd never lost a pound. He was from Chicago by the name of Allison. And we didn't know why, but he was just big, fat, rosy cheeks. So the guy Baker said, I'm not going to faint today. He said, they'll beat me. And so we said, yeah, you better faint today. Somebody better faint. So Allison said, I'll faint. We said, God knows don't faint. Man, we'd have to take everybody on the detail to get you in. So sure enough, came time, and we was expecting Baker to faint. Baker showed up, and we said, well, why didn't you faint? Oh, no, I can't faint. So here Allison wasn't there. So we go looking for him, and here he is laying down there by some lumber, and like he was, and the Japanese looked at him and said, well, you guys are going to have to take him in, you know. So it sort of ruined our fainting program. But we actually killed 8 Japanese, and accidentally on purpose while we were up there. Our crew did. And we learned how to do that. And when we would do it, we would have an accident plan. Sometimes we'd have to plan it for a few months. But we did it, and we'd start hollering, suing and saying, that meant I'm sorry, and go get them. And I'll bring out one of the things that happened. We were loading narrow gauge railroad rails, and they had on each side they had a little piece of metal, and you had 2 holes on each side and through the rail, and they just put 4 bolts in it. Well, when they took them apart in Manchuria, they left those sticking out. Well, one time it was one sticking out, and we'd been trying for a long time to get this Jap in the corner on a gondola, because there was a winch that would pull up the load, but we had to have 2 guys, one on a rope on each side, and pull it over to where we could pull it over the railroad car and then lower it down in the railroad car. So we got it just right. Now, no American was close to him, and we jammed him up against the side of the gondola with that thing stuck in his groin. And instead of the Japanese looking and seeing he was bleeding like everything, they called for somebody in the emergency vehicle. And what I'm going to tell you is really funny, but this is part of what they do. What arrived was a 3-wheel bicycle with the basket bicycle. So they put him in there with his legs hanging out over one side and his head hanging out over the other side. Well, the road was as far as here, probably to the back of this building from where we were, and the railroad tracks was there with all the cross ties. So the guy that was riding that bicycle to take him to the hospital, he elected to go right down the railroad track, right by the side of the railroad track. And that when those tires was hitting that one wheel and everything, and his head was going up and down and all. We said, well, if going didn't kill him, the bicycle ride would. We had one guy there that we flipped his bill down. He wore a baseball cap all the time. And one day somebody, sort of in a scuffle or something about some rice bags, flipped that bill down, and his eyes went back in the back of his head, and they had to lead him off. Well, we called him Simple Simon. And then Simple Simon stayed in the hospital about 3 weeks, came back, and the first day he got back, we got in a little scuffle and flipped that bill of his cap down, and he'd gone back to the hospital. We sent him back to the hospital about 6 times, and we didn't see him anymore. I guess they figured what we was doing. But we sabotaged everything we could sabotage. We stole it, took it and put it in our latrine, and then when they started to sort of clean out the latrine, they found all this stuff in there. I mean, they beat us unmercifully. We had a great big cement mixer on one project, and we took us 3 months to get a rock that was big enough to go, I mean, just about the size to go in that hopper down through the opening into the cement mixer. And when it did, it just took all those blades out, what do you call them, baffles out, just stripped it right out, shut the thing down. They beat every one of us and lined us up and didn't feed us that afternoon. And then about 11 o'clock at night, they said, if you will say that you're sorry, and we will not do that anymore, and say that to your God, swear it to your God, we'll let you go to sleep. So, man, all our hands went up like that. We took that oath because it was just a chance we had. We were in the B-29s had burned out our barracks in a half of the town that we were in. We was in a port town, and they burned it out and killed a lot of people. Well, only one of us got burnt, and they put us in a old brick kiln for housing, and we were there, and we asked them for 1 day off, 50 at a time, to wash our clothes because we didn't have any clothes, spare clothes. So we went down and we took it, and the only thing they had was, I didn't even have any soap, was just salt water, and so we were 50 of us was naked in the end of the building. And the guy with the Coast Guard, Coast Artillery, looked up through his finger and he said, they're coming down 11 o'clock. So at first we didn't know what he meant, but the airplanes, the Navy, they would do that, they're dive bombers. So all of a sudden, here goes the rockets flying everywhere and the bombs, and they were hitting the ships and strafing the area. And here was 50, and naked was in the end of that building. So we took off and went across a coal pile, got up on a knoll up there. Here we was up there waving like we was at a football game, you know. Man, we had never seen any dive bombers, and that was a great, great day for us. And I often wondered what that Navy pilot went back and reported. So many things of that nature happened, but we had our rice was one little bowl of rice in the morning, and a rice ball at noon, and a little bowl like a cereal bowl a little over for night. And that was all we had except what we could steal. Now, we stole, when we got on those details unloading those ships, we ate raw beans and raw rice and raw fish, old dried fish and everything, anything that we could eat. And I went from 125 pounds up to 168 pounds when I got out of there. And we were in a graphite factory one time they sent us in there, and here was all these big factories all the way around us. There were, it was an airplane assembly plant right close to us, a runway right out front, and the other kind of factories there. We went into a graphite factory where they had these extruders making electric carbon sticks for one-man submarine batteries. Well, they told us what they were doing, and this meant that they were going to use those against Americans, so we tried to figure out which ones was good and which ones was bad. So we did figure out the markings that the inspector put on them, and we cut them down 100. They was making about 300 a month. We cut them down 100 the first month that we were there. We found out the good markings and the bad markings, and there's a pile out there for the bad ones and a pile out there for the good ones. So we put the good ones in the bad pile and the bad ones in the good pile. So we really messed them up. Right, the second month, we cut them down another 100, and the 23rd of that month, we had them down to 23. And so we knew we had to get out of there because the B-29s were coming in and they were bombing those such complexes and so forth. So we did everything we could do to get out of there because we had no markings to where we were. There was prisoners of war there. So one day this guy had an epileptic fit for real. And they said, what in the world is he, what's the matter with him? We said, oh, that's that tropical disease. It's very contagious, man. Don't get close to him. And so they wouldn't even go in the hospital where it was. And so that night we decided, well, we get out of here. Everybody going to have epileptic fits. So we caught contagious epileptic fits real quick. Well, we put them completely out of business. And they lined us up to move. and they were standing there talking, and one of the guards, we had a Marine that could understand good Japanese, and he said he heard him say, "I think we've been duped." Well, it was too late then because they'd already made up their minds to move us out. That's just some of the things that we did to make it miserable for them. But it was plenty miserable for us. We had in our rice, we had wormy rice for a long time. We complained about the wormy rice, the little white worms with black eyes. At first we covered them up, and then we didn't cover them up. And then all of a sudden we got some rice that didn't have the worms in it. We complained about that too, because we had our complaining going all the time, but it didn't help. We lost a lot of men there, and I want to tell you how most people like to know about the atomic bombs and how the war came to an end with us. And they had issued a order to shoot all prisoners of war when the Americans or Allied forces landed on their homeland. And they were already training the men, old women, and men, old men, and young boys and all, girls, with picks and shovels and sticks, and even hot water, boiling water, anything to pour on when they came aboard, when the invasion took place. We could not imagine anything happening to get us out of there before they shoot us, because we didn't understand that the only thing we could understand was that they had to invade to take Japan. So one day the interpreter came by, and he was an American Japanese, come from Cleveland, Ohio, and he was our interpreter. The only one was ever even good to us at all. And he told us that the Americans had dropped a bomb that was so strong until if you were sitting 75 miles away, it would petrify you. Well, we thought it was just another one of those big lies they had. We couldn't imagine anything like that. We didn't know anything about an atomic bomb or anything. So the next day after they hit Hiroshima, they hit us with a 2,000-pound bomb on the second, when the second atomic bomb was dropped. In the meantime, between that time and the first one that was dropped, they took us and took us out to an old rice paddy. And here comes a truck loaded with picks and shovels, and here comes another truck loaded with 4 machine guns and a bunch of soldiers and our own guards. So they put us out there and told us we were digging our own grave. So again, we wasn't going to just let them shoot us and all. So we lined up with three men to a group, and we were going to try to take one of those machine guns if we could if they started to shoot us. But I'll say this to you. When you dig in your own grave, like we were, you learn to dig very slow. You learn how to dig with the back of your shovel. You learn how to put, when they're standing in front of you, putting some of the dirt out, and then you learn how to put it back in the hole after they're gone. Well, 3.5 days went by before we got a little bit of relief. So what happened is in that interim time, we had what you might call a shallow grave, not really a full grave, shallow grave. And every day that prior to that the whistle would blow for 12 o'clock, they'd take us in and they would give us, they'd take us in for a rice ball. That's all right, I don't need it now. They give us for a rice ball, and then he'd come and tell us 5 minutes, fall out in 5 minutes. So on the third day that we was out there, when that whistle blew, they didn't stop us from working. They'd acted real nervous, and they all were up at each one of the corners. The Japanese guards were close to those machine guns. We thought sure that would be the day they would shoot us. So we were sweating it out, and we were saying, yeah, this is probably going to be it, because they won't go in now, and they wasn't going to take us into camp. So we watched them close and everything, and 15 minutes went by, and finally a guy rode up on a bicycle and evidently told them, bring us back in. So we went back in, and the interpreter came in after we had our rice ball and said 5 minutes more to fall out. Well, at that very time, very minute, just practically that happened, this boy with the Coast Guard, 200 Coast Guard artillery, heard something, and he went outside and he said, hey, it's a B-29 in the valley. And it was coming right toward us. And he looked at the wind and looked at everything, and he said, "Oh my God, if that's one of those bombs that drop here that petrify you 75 miles away, we'll gone us." Across the street was a great big building, 5 stories high, with a smokestack in the middle, and there was a textile mill. Worked about 400 or 500 Japanese men and women. So that B-29 came in, and when he said the bomb was released, because he could see that area, that B-29, when that bomb was dropped, saw it go up, he says, "Coming right in here on us." And most of us got outside real quick. I did. I laid on my back and was watching the building. I was just watching whatever was over the fence. And that bomb came down and hit right where the smokestack came out of that building. And all the debris and all that, and of course it killed several, nearly 400, I understand. And that 5 minutes didn't take place. So I guess we assumed the guy was out there. They were waiting for us, and maybe they would shoot us that afternoon. But we couldn't get out, and all the emergency equipment and everything, and I say we came within 5 minutes maybe of getting shot. So the next morning, late that afternoon, we were informed that they had dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki, and that the Japanese and the Americans were talking. And by the next morning, we were told that we wouldn't be going back out, that the Americans and Japanese were talking, and the emperor would talk. And I forget whether it was that afternoon or the next afternoon, but he did talk for 2.5 hours. And they moved, when the minute was over with, they moved all the guards from inside our camp out to the perimeter. In fact, they replaced the guards, and they said they would have the guards there to protect us, to keep the Japanese from coming in and harming us. Well, that was good, but on the other hand, we were planning on taking those guards that had been mean to us all that time. We were going to take them and put them in that brick kiln and cremate them. And that was one of the things that a lot of prisoners was killing a lot of them. So anyway, they said that, so after the emperor talked, everything went dead like that. Now that man had the power. They didn't lift a finger at us again. And we waited, and we were going to try to get all the men out of there because there was some Japanese going up in the mountains and carrying up guns and stuff like that. We thought those rascals would go up there and get high on sake and come down and kill all of us. So we were trying to all get out of there. And then right at the last, our captain got cold feet, and he was scared. And we couldn't carry 14-liter cases, not a small bunch, so only 21 decided they would leave, and I was one of them. And we went, and we got on a train, rode all day, went into Nagoya, changed trains, got on a train with a bunch of Jap soldiers, and there was a general car. He had his own private car at the back. He was the third-ranking Japanese general, and he was going in to report to Tojo. He had been in China. So he sort of enlightened us. He spoke perfect English. So we went into Tokyo, and we couldn't find any Americans. So we looked around, and he told us there wasn't any there, but we weren't going to believe that rascal, you know. We didn't believe anything. So anyway, we finally found a barracks. They'd dropped us shoes and clothes. And everybody thought we was occupational troops. We finally we took streetcars and threw everybody off and took it and were running around trying to find the Americans. So we got to a barracks, and when in that barracks it was 25 Japanese and a lieutenant. Well, when we walked up there, this guy started bowing to us. And the Marine said, "You needn't to bow to us. We wasn't, you didn't for 3.5 years." And he asked us where we was from, and we told him, and he got scared. He went inside. We didn't have any arms or anything. He had a rifle. So he goes in there, and they all come out there. In the last 2.5 miles that we walked, we had 25 guards around us to keep to protect us. So we turned ourselves in at General MacArthur's headquarters. A few funny things happened there. We pulled up we finally got a truck to take us there. We pulled up, and the guards were just shoulder to shoulder. And this MP sergeant came out, and he said, asked us where we were, what were we? We told him we were prisoners of war. He said, "How many of you is it?" So we lined up and counted off in Japanese. And he looked at us, and the major was there, Major said, we better check these guys over. Have them give you a name and everything, and I'll go in and check them and see if they are really Americans. So he did, and we were cleared. So they took us in and they fed us sea ration, shot us with all kinds of shots. And they had a hospital ship, Benevolent, sitting there, and they told us at that time that they would, anybody needed any special treatment, they would put us on the hospital ship. Well, that nurse was sitting there holding my arm, holding my hand, taking my vitals, you know. And she said, are you all right? I said, sure, I'm all right. I'm a free man. She said, well, your heartbeat is speeding up. I said, listen, it's been 5 years since I've been this close to an American woman, and here you are holding my hand. She said, doctor, this was ready for San Francisco. So they put us on C-54, and we flew back and flew to Okinawa and then flew to the Philippines. So I got to the Philippines, and they sent a message to my family that I was returned to military personnel in Yokohama, Japan. So I went down to the Western Union when I got to the Philippines and I was thinking about that, those two dog tags in the grave over there. And I thought I better send a telegram. So I sent them another telegram that put my name down there, my middle name, which is Dowling, and I signed it Dowling. I paid for it, and they sent the same thing that they sent from Japan, up in Japan, Yokohama. So they got a telegram. Well, first off, they'd gotten a telegram when I was missing in action. Then after 2.5 years, assumed dead because they heard nothing from me. Then they got a letter, and they came with my dog tags to my home, tried to pay off the insurance with their dog tags, said they found that I was dead. Then they get this letter that I was returned to military personnel in Yokohama, Japan. That was in 1945, and country folks didn't think about the planes getting from one country to the other in one day. Then they got this other letter the next day. So there was still confusion. They did not know. My daddy told the guy, he said, what if I take this insurance money and he's still alive? I said, well, you're going to have to give it back. He said, well, you can just keep it. So anyway, they didn't know that I was alive at all until I got to Letterman General Hospital, and I called, and that's in the documentary, and I'd like to say that. And my mother answered the phone. I told her who it was, and the phone went dead. Her sister was there, and my aunt, and she answered the phone, and the phone went dead. Then my oldest sister came to the phone, and she answered the phone, and the phone went dead again. So I'm there saying, hello, 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 hello. Finally, my daddy said, who is this? And I said, this is Dowling. He said, oh, you're not. I'm glad. I didn't think you were dead. But it looks like I got 3 dead women here. So he said, well, you just hold on now. He goes and gets the water and pours it in their face. He said, now they're looking like they're moving, so I think they'll be all right. Now, I've told you a lot of the things I could say. I could stay here another hour telling you. But I want to tell you, the hate by that time was terrible. I couldn't stand to even get close to a Japanese. And here I am, I'm coming home, and and my homecoming was wonderful. I mean, my hometown turned out. I'm telling you, they couldn't have given myself and one of my brothers that was in Germany got home the same night, and we had a royal welcome. But in 1945, 46, you didn't dare tell somebody you had to go to see a psychiatrist. So I didn't want to go. The VA wanted me to go at the time, and did do a little bit to me, but I couldn't tell anybody. People would ask me, he said, how you doing? You enjoying being free? I said, man, let me tell you, I enjoy it very much, but I couldn't tell no one, not even my family, that I was having nightmares. I had nightmares for 30 years, just as real and sometimes even better than real, fighting those Japs all over again. It was eating me up. My nerves I was in shambles. I went down to 148 pounds at one time. I couldn't eat anything, couldn't keep anything on my stomach. And I just was having a terrible time. And I want to tell you, I told you at first, putting those notches, I had enough notches I didn't even know how many I had on my belt as far as hate times that I'd hate. The Japanese discredited us. They said we were cowards, and the United States didn't want us back, all that kind of stuff. But I hated them. And I don't know whether there's any of you in here today that have hate for anybody, or have hate for things that you really don't know what you hate for. I wouldn't even let my wife buy a Japanese car. In fact, I wouldn't even ride in one for a while. I mean, that's how bad I hated them. And one night about 2:30 in the morning, I got on my knees. I had to. I had cancer in the right lung. I lost half of the right lung, and it came back, and I cured my own cancer with some special things that somebody gave me. I'd had some other cancer. I had pneumonia another 12 times, plus the 2 times I had it in Japan. I had numerous times attacks of malaria. I had all this stuff, plus all those nightmares, and I couldn't keep a wife. They got scared, and they knew I'd killed people in the war. And they got scared for their own health and their own well-being. Wouldn't even sleep in the same room. Then they got to another room and wouldn't even stay in the same house. So that's what some of the type of turmoil that I was going through. And I talked to a preacher about it, and he says, well, it says in Matthew, you got to ask for forgiveness. You got to forgive those Japanese. I said, you mean to tell me I've got to say that I'm going to forgive them as much as they've done to us, and they've never apologized? I said, man, that's the worst thing in the world I've ever tried to do. He said, well, you're going to have to do it. And I said, well, I need some help. So he started helping me. My wife helped me too. I started to write something and get this stuff out of me by writing my book, which it took me 20-something years to get it written and get it published. And, you know, the good Lord knew more about what I needed than I knew. If I had my book had come out 10 years ago, I would not have gotten the publicity that I've gotten. But it just happened that it came right to the time that Ken Burns' book came out, and I was in that book. I didn't even have any idea that I would be in it. But I wanted to tell my story because of the freedom that we fought for, like all of us did in World War II, and like all our soldiers have always fought for. It's one of the most precious things in the world. And just freedom to go to the drugstore or go to the show or something like that or take a ride is not all your freedom that I have now and all that you need. You need freedom of hate and all the things that go along with it. It'll get you personality where you can't even meet somebody without looking at something that you finding something you hate them about. Or you hate a different group because they're a certain color. I don't hate anybody. I'm free. I'm as free as any American can be, and I value my freedom. My wife can tell you, if anybody steps on my freedom, I'm going to step on them because it's the most valuable thing in the world. Now, I don't know whether any of you will get that out of my book, but I think you will, is how and what some of the things that you have to do to get rid of it. But I was determined. It took me 2.5, nearly 3 years. And the preacher asked me, he said, how you doing? I said, look like you're doing better. I said, yeah. If you'll call the media and tell them I'll be down at the Honda place Monday morning, I'll get down there and kiss a Honda on the hood. And I would shiver when somebody would think they're going to take me to Japan, want me to go back to Japan. But right now, the only way I would go back to Japan is if I had an appointment with the Prime Minister, and I'd tell him I would apologize and ask for forgiveness for how we sabotaged some of the operation when we was over there and the ones we killed, if they do the same thing. And I don't know whether that'll ever happen or not. That's the only way I'd want to go back. And I'd like to ask if any of you have any questions that you want to ask me. I'll be glad to try to answer them. Yes? Huh? Well, I don't know what to think about them. Let me tell you, I lived with them for 3.5 years, and what makes them tick is completely different from what we are. They don't know, and I didn't hear part of what you asked, but I'm trying to answer it. And they didn't acknowledge anything. They didn't, and there's a guy in Los Angeles now that runs a newspaper, and he's wanting to help me get this into Japan, my book. And I'll work with him to do it. I don't have any reason not to, because I don't hate them now. I mean, they can do all they want to. But for years, I was afraid to go back to Japan, because if I'd see one of those guys that did all the things they did to us, I'm afraid what I'd do to him. Any further questions? Yeah. Go ahead. I joined the Army as a private, and I went through the school in Manila before the war, the ordnance school, and was taking training to go to an ordnance and some field office or ordnance Army base as an ordnance officer. I passed in the top 5, and I was commissioned as a war commission or field commission at first lieutenant. Functioned that way through the fighting, and when it was over with, they reverted back because everybody was dead that was in and had any knowledge to it. I was nominated for the Medal of Honor, didn't get that, and I reverted back to sergeant. And they didn't give us but one rank. When the war was going on, I was corporal and then went to get the commission so that I could deal with the officers on this detail I was in. And we didn't ever get we finished school, but we never did get our ceremony to get commissioned. So when I got back, and I just discharged out as a sergeant without an argument, because there was no need to argue about it. And they gave me an opportunity about 17 years ago to come into the Alabama State Defense Force, which is part of the National Guard, as a captain. And over the years that I've worked with them and volunteered and followed the guidelines and was a good person and didn't have anything else, they promoted me through the ranks, the captain, up through the major, through the lieutenant colonel, and now colonel. And that's the highest I can go in the Alabama State Defense Force, and that's how I got my rank. And it is recognized by the National Guard and the governor of Alabama and so forth. I don't know whether this state has a defense force or not, but it's a good thing. We saved Alabama taxpayers nearly $300,000 last year because of what we did in labor, like security for the Navy ships that come in at Mardi Gras, the export, the airport, and Orange Beach, and all those type of things, and traffic. We're training to be, I'm search certified. We're training to do search and rescue in case of emergency. In case of a hurricane, we'll run shelters and things like that. So we do a lot of good, too. In other words, and our ranks are approved by the state and the adjutant general. So that's how I became a colonel. Anybody else? Yes. No, sir, that's fine. I'll answer you how I feel. And I wrote President Bush how I felt and got an answer back. I said, you're the commanding officer, or you're the commander-in-chief. And World War II had 16 million people, soldiers in uniform. And if that was a problem someplace, they didn't ask and take any questions or didn't go back to Congress and say, how much money can we spend on trying to get this thing done? They just went in there and did it, and we were a success, and we came out victorious, right? That's what is right. I told him that the only thing that those people over there will stand is power. Now, I know that don't suit some people, and I know it, but if they had gone in there, and if he had declared war when bin Laden and when they would hit the Twin Towers in New York, and the war powers would have been in, he could have gone and got some men from the draft. He could have drafted them. And I said, the only way you're going to get those win over there is with power. Get over there and do it and get out of there. and that's what they haven't done. It went political, the same as it did in Vietnam and the other war, the Desert Storm. I mean, the Desert, what was it? The Desert Storm, first Bush. So my idea is get enough men in there to protect our men and make it a success instead of a political matter. And you might think